Hello, Sir David the Bard here. I'm going to do a video, which is going to be one of my last videos, on sudden infant death syndrome. I studied this when I was in college at my BYU degree and my Northwestern University. I'd like to put a disclaimer on this and basically need to check with your doctor no matter what with anything you're going to do with your baby. I'm going to give a theory of sudden infant death, what causes it, and I've had this theory for 20 or for almost 50 years, and I haven't been able to record or get the information out. So if you're interested in SIDS, great, hang around and I'll tell you a little bit about it. If you're not, turn it off and go to one of my other videos. I'm getting to be aged. I'm 73 years old, and there's some words and phrases I can't remember. So I hope you'll give me a little bit of the benefit of the doubt when I come to those places that I can't remember the word or remember the spelling or whatever. I know that the comments that will come in on this video are going to be pretty much negative, and I expect that. But that doesn't mean the theory isn't true. It just means one person doesn't agree. So anyway, let me launch into sudden infant death. When a baby is born, it comes out a nice cold or nice warm womb and water into a very cold, wet world. Sometimes the doctor has to stimulate the baby to breathe and to stimulate the baby to breathe. A baby sleeps most of its beginning of life. What I'm going to tell you is basically the sensory deprivation is the reason that the baby dies of no natural causes. Sudden infant death is usually a baby who has seen the doctor within 5 or 6 days of death, and the baby seems to be perfectly normal, and the parents find the baby dead of no particular cause. It's not shaken baby syndrome. It's not any other autopsy doesn't show any cause of death. The baby seems to be basically healthy and ends up dead. Well, how does that happen? One of the things that I've learned is that life is sensory input. If the sensory input stops, the person will die. And at McGill University in Canada, they did a very interesting experiment years ago where they packed college students in a box, put cotton all around them, and cut off all the sensory systems, and to see what the result was going to be. And the result was that every one of the students that was in that box had out-of-body experiences. Now, I know that that's controversial. I know that that is something that can be argued or whatever, but I've had an out-of-body experience, so I know it's a true principle, but most people don't know what triggers that particular event. The baby sleeps most of its life. The first month, it doesn't die a sudden infant death. I think that the birth process is so much stimulation that the baby has plenty of memory to use during the REM period of sleep. The apnea that these newborns face usually, and I'm lost my thought, I'm sorry, this is what I said. The baby needs a certain amount of stimulation to stay alive, just exactly the same way with old people and new people, young people. If we don't have sensory input, we have out-of-body experiences. I remember a study done long ago where they put a bunch of babies together in an orphanage, I think, and all they did was diaper them and feed them, but they didn't give them any other stimulation and they all died. So my theory is basically that we need a certain amount of stimulation every day because we need the ability to pull that stimulation back out during the REM period of sleep. And we know that babies do use a lot of REM sleep, and here's what I think is going on. I think that when we sleep, we're usually not in REM sleep, but REM sleep is the dream cycle. And the dream cycle seems to paralyze the body from the neck down. And we know now that the breathing doesn't come from the brain anymore, it's coming from the medulla, which is basically the bottom of the spine. So basically what's happening is we go to sleep, the newborn baby and regular people, and we have several periods of REM sleep. Well, during REM sleep, it appears that the stimulation is not there. We have to dream the stimulation, and the dream is a artificial stimulation that the body believes it's receiving information, and it's really not. And we rely heavily upon the short-term memory banks when we're a baby. Once we develop long-term memory, right around 12 months old, the sensory input is developed well enough that we can use long-term. If we run out of dream material, we have an out-of-body experience. Now, how this works, there's many more questions in my theory than answers. I believe that the baby is sleeping and it goes into REM sleep, and what triggers that mechanism, I don't know. And I'm going to tell you all the things I don't know, because this is a theory that has a certain amount of controversy to it. When the baby is sleeping, it goes into REM sleep, and it is dreaming off of the short-term memory banks. They are making up the material that fools the body into thinking it's receiving sensory input, when indeed it's not. And what happens is, if there isn't enough dream material, memory, the emergency system is apnea. Apnea is an emergency response that the baby gets, and we all get if you have apnea, and it usually has a triggering as a result of waking the baby up. If a baby has apnea and you reach over and just barely touch it, it immediately becomes alive and well again. It resets the whole system. So my theory is that basically the baby runs out of dream material and stimulation and goes into REM, runs out of short-term memory, triggers apnea, and the apnea is supposed to have a waking response. There's two situations there that the trigger is not known, but the apnea is well established in these babies. And so what ends up is the baby has apnea and it doesn't wake up. Well, what's going to happen? The energy body, the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, will pop right out of the body. No symptoms, nothing that an autopsy would show, an absolute death from apnea and the triggering response not working. So the situation is that the other scientists have discovered that if you lay the baby on its back, it has less chance of sudden death. Well, whatever the sudden death in SIDS theory that is going to be true must fit all of the things we know about sudden infant death. Let me give you a couple. One of them is being on the back. The back allows the sensory systems, the mouth, the ears, the smell, the touch. The baby can kick around and move and can see. So that there is sensory input that the baby can use for the short-term memory banks. Number two, we know that cold climates basically result in higher infant death syndrome. That's because the baby is wrapped up in snowsuits and the sensory deprivation comes to them through being dressed for cold weather. The other areas, we know that the American Indians have a very high rate of sudden infant death, especially among girls, because their culture basically doesn't appreciate or prize girls. They want boys for warriors, and that's a long tradition of history. We know that let me think for a second. We know that the babies that die usually have come from going to a doctor's appointment. And what does that do? Why does that fit into sudden infant death? It's because and I'm having trouble because I'm so old. I should have put this out when I was younger. The baby probably has a fever and a cold, usually some of those basic things that children get. And when they get that, they have to sleep more. They're putting a strain on the small or short-term memory banks. They sleep more. Anytime that you do something that interferes with sensory input, you're going to find a baby that probably is going to die of SIDS. Now, when a baby is born, we don't know how much feeling it has or how much stimulation it has. The doctor will do the little foot test where he touches the foot. I forget what the name of that is. But again, they don't die in the first 30 days. And they don't die after the 12th month. Well, after the 12th month, they've developed language a little bit, and they've had a lot of taste of solid foods, and they have plenty of stimulation. So the emergency situation will basically subside, and the apnea will subside after the 12th month. So there's no sudden infant death after the 12th month. And it's the leading cause of death in the first year of life. I think it's the leading cause of death behind accidents. I don't know. But I know the 2nd to 4th month is the peak of sudden infant death, and we need to have a theory that basically says that's part of the theory. And my theory is that basically myopic vision is developed during the 2nd and 4th month. If that doesn't develop well, and the baby has nothing to see or nothing to touch or nothing to play with, or it's not being held or jostled or loved and being in somebody's arms, basically it's going to be a negative sensory input. So my theory basically goes around sensory input. The baby needs to have plenty of sensory input. Now the other thing is the baby could be getting plenty of sensory input, but it might not be being recorded in the short-term memory banks. It may not be there. And the memory banks might discharge it for some reason, and when the baby needs it during REM sleep, it's just not there. The apnea sets in, and there's no trigger response. We don't know why the trigger response is not working, but if a baby runs out of dream information, which is sensory input information, and it goes to the emergency system of having an apnea attack, the apnea is supposed to trigger a awakening response to protect the baby from death. So the the thing that I don't want you to do, I don't want you to get your baby and be, shaking it and acting goofy. Sensory input should be very gentle and very kind. If you want to have your baby sleeping on its back, I would recommend that it's possible that you leave a light on, so if the baby wakes up and you're not there, it can look around the crib and see and get sensory input. We know that thermal regulation can be part of sudden infant death, that basically if the baby's dressed too warm or is in a snowsuit, you're going to pick up extra strain on the batteries. I look at this as a battery, like a car battery, that you use it all the time, and as long as it's only used a little bit, the dream information is there. But if the baby happens to sleep more because it's gone to the doctor, it may have a weak battery, and before you know it, it tries to dream, and the dream response doesn't work, so the apnea sets in, and then the triggering response of being awake doesn't work, and you end up with a baby that the spirit just slipped out of. It just came out. That is the reason that those babies, I believe, die. It's that the sensory input is not being stored, not being received, or is running low and runs out during the REM sleep cycle, triggers the apnea, and the apnea has no following trigger to wake the baby up. So that's basically my theory of sudden infant death. I'm going to probably do another video right behind this one, because there's more areas of sudden infant death that we know about that are slipping my mind right now. I just can't bring it up. But the basic part of what I'm saying is that baby needs to receive proper sensory input, and the baby may be defective or the parents may be defective. One of the things that we know about sudden infant death is coming to my mind. Smokers have higher rates of sudden infant death, and that may be because the babies are smaller, or the mothers are not as responsible, that the baby is in a house that has smoke in it. How that affects sensory input is the smell. That smell is there, and it basically should be a sensory input, but for some reason the studies show that those mothers have a higher incidence of sudden infant death syndrome. I can't remember the rest of what I'm going to say, so I'm going to cut it short. I'll do a part 2 and come up with the things I've missed, and again, I want to disclaim that I don't want you to do anything weird with your baby. If you want your baby to sleep at night with the light on and a radio playing softly in the background, that sensory input is probably okay for all babies, but check with your doctor. Don't do what I tell you to do without checking, because I don't want to be responsible for somebody being stupid. One thing I've learned in all the years I've done my videos, which is 9 years, there's a lot of stupid people in the world, and many of them are going to respond to this video, but I hope it gets out to somebody who can really take the ball and run with it and test the mechanisms of apnea and the triggering response and the REM sleep. So I'm going to cut it off here, and I'll do a part 2 and finish up some of the details that I haven't given you yet. I appreciate you. The end. The end.